Well, considerable drama and surprise here in Lower Manhattan tonight. We had believed that the jury deliberations were over today, and in fact, what happened was the foreman turned to the judge and said, "We actually have a verdict." And I can now say in the last few seconds that the jury has found the defendant, Donald J. Trump, guilty on the first count, and those remaining counts, another 33 counts, are being recited now. So we can say that on at least one count tonight, in the last few moments, Donald Trump has been found guilty. Now, obviously, that is a devastating blow for the former president. He now becomes the first former president ever to be convicted of a crime. There are massive political implications in this verdict as well, because, you know, everybody here across the United States is aware there are two verdicts in a way. This one here at this criminal courthouse, but also the much bigger verdict, that of the American voters on November the 5th. But this is a devastating political and legal blow for the president. He was, we're told by courtroom reporters, incredibly calm in the minutes beforehand, even closing his eyes as the jurors, the district attorney and the judge came into court. But the political significance of this is something that's going to be unfolding in the coming weeks and months on the campaign trail. Essentially, will Americans be prepared to vote for somebody who has been convicted of a crime? And, you know, we've always known that for his political base, that is not an issue, because how Trump has framed this is that the legal system has been weaponized against him. But nevertheless, the big question is, will centrist and moderate voters now say that they cannot vote for somebody who is a convicted felon?
Donald Trump is the most courageous man on the planet.
This guilty verdict came on the second day of jury deliberations, with his supporters gathered outside and their loyalty not in doubt.
Bozo! Bozo!
This is still a seismic political moment, one that has the potential to change the outcome of the presidential election.
I'm in the middle of an interview.
Now Donald Trump's supporters must confront the reality
Fake news! Fake news!
of whether they are prepared to vote for a convicted criminal. Trump left for this short final trip to the Manhattan courthouse with his customary wave.
Sorry, sir, not being sent to prison.
And on arrival once again made clear his contempt for the entire process.
And by the way, everyone's against this case. I haven't seen one legal scholar or expert in the law say that this case should have been filed. It should not have been filed.
It is clear that Trump will appeal this verdict. He will now return to the campaign trail, seeking to persuade voters this is not a humiliation, but rather a validation of his view that the guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion, and that all the court cases he faces have been weaponized by the Biden White House to take down a political opponent. The heart of the prosecution case was that Donald Trump paid the actress Stormy Daniels £100,000 to buy her silence, falsifying business records by passing them off as legal costs, all in the service of a second crime: illegally influencing the 2016 presidential election.
What do you have to say to Donald Trump?
The trial hinged on the evidence of his longtime former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen.
What do you have to say?
I was the personal lawyer for a notoriously bad man.
A man who has a history of lying.
Michael Cohen!
And so the jurors had to decide, was Cohen telling the truth this time? Or was he simply in the business of revenge and self-promotion?
I am your fixer.
At every stage, Donald Trump's strategy has been denial, alongside a barrage of insults aimed at the judge.
So corrupt and so conflicted, like no judge has ever been.
And at the judicial system.
Stormy Horseface Daniels, no attraction. No affair, I call it no affair.
Fascination with this case has been high. This was the cue for the Cohen evidence. But the impact of this verdict on the November election remains the great unknown. Will Americans, especially independent and centrist voters who will decide the outcome, be prepared to vote for a convicted felon? Certainly last week, just ahead of the closing arguments, Trump appeared buoyant.
Telling crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in history, you're fired, like the apprentice. You're fired.
Holding a rally in the Democratic stronghold of the Bronx, claiming that even here he has a chance of winning in November, refashioning his old slogan for this diverse community.
We will make America great again. Thank you, Bronx. Thank you, New York. We love you.
The conclusion of the New York trial brings to an end the only court case likely to occur before that November election. The other 3 trials he faces in Washington, Miami and Atlanta are all facing significant delays. The great hope of Team Trump is that if he wins the White House again, he can pardon himself in the 2 federal cases and delay the Georgia one, which is a state trial.
Mr. Trump, how are you feeling about today?
For Donald Trump, this trial has served a political purpose, allowing him to frame himself as a victim of a weaponized justice system.
It's a very sad day. This is a dark day in America. We have a rigged court case that should have never been brought.
Whether he can use that argument for the next 160 days and win back the White House, well, that is the key question that may well decide the future direction of America.
Well, back to Robert now outside that New York courthouse. And Robert, just bring us up to date with what's happening now.
Well, there's considerable confusion here. Police sirens, ambulances are passing by. Activists and protesters are watching the scene. Obviously, as you expect, an incredibly polarizing decision. Trump supporters are deeply shocked. Trump's many critics are celebrating this as a victory for the legal system. In court, we are told that Donald Trump has had very little reaction. He's been staring directly at the jurors, but Trump's chief lawyer, for whom this is a crushing loss, has got his head in his hands, and the judge himself has now thanked the jurors for their service and has asked them to go home, saying that they can now talk about this case for the first time, very obviously, in 6 weeks. There will now be a period in which the judge will consider what his sentence will be. The judge has got sort of broad options in front of him. He obviously could send Donald Trump to prison, perhaps for as long as 4 years, but that is seen as unlikely. Other options include just simply being reprimanded and being detained at home, or being fined, or being put on probation. So the judge has got a little bit of options there, and we're now just told in the last few moments that sentencing has been set for July the 11th.
And Donald Trump has now been found guilty of on all counts, Robert, a massive dramatic upheaval. What ultimately does this mean for Donald Trump's election chances come November?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, let's just go back to basics. Donald Trump has been found guilty of all 34 counts. So that makes him, the first president in American history ever to be convicted of crimes. But, as we've talked about on this program so many times, views of Donald Trump are both visceral and deeply entrenched. It's not clear that this case, of all the 4 cases that he faces, is going to be the one that sways public opinion radically. So I think Donald Trump now returns, bizarre though it may seem, to the campaign trail. And he will, as I pointed out in my report earlier, frame this as a narrative about him being a victim, about him being a martyr to a weaponized legal system. So that is the state of play. We now have got 5 minutes of drama, as you see now, Donald Trump coming out of the courtroom. And this is kind of perhaps, the most important moment for him between now and Election Day on November the 5th.
Judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for convicted felons?
And that is the exact framing we were expecting if a guilty verdict happens. In other words, for him to portray this as just one outcome, one jury decision. And actually the bigger jury is the American voters on November the 5th. So, you know, the critical question becomes, and we don't know the answer yet, is how this plays in those sort of heartland battleground states. How is this viewed in Wisconsin or in Pennsylvania or in other kind of swing states like Nevada, Arizona and Georgia? Do centrist and independent voters whom Trump needs in order to win the White House, do they regard this as a terrible blow and an indictment of Trump, or do they see this as actually a sort of frivolous case in which the Department of Justice was weaponized by the Biden White House? So there's a lot of politics in this, and you saw exactly there how Donald Trump will now launch his campaign for the remaining 5 months of this election.